Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining me. It is very nice to see you all. And thank you very much, those of you who are joining the satsang for the first time. I see a few new names and a few familiar names. Thank you so much for being here. As is my usual habit, I will ask you to raise your hand with your little hand gizmo, just to let me know you can hear me. Good, thank you very, very much. As always, I'm very honored by your presence and very, very happy to be able to spend this time with you. Let's take care of just a little bit more in the way of housekeeping, just to make sure we're all oriented to the satsang. You have audio and viewing options, so you can set your audio and video. You don't have to worry about your microphone or your camera because you can see and hear me, but I cannot see or hear you. And if you have a question, you can type the question into the Q&A box, or if you have a comment. So for example, if you wanted to tell me what was the best part of your trip to New York City, then you could pop that into the Q&A box, and that way I would know that you knew where the Q&A box was and it was working. So feel free to do that just in case you've been to New York City recently and had a good time there. Meanwhile, last week, we looked at Arjuna's doubts about his ability to perform the practices of yoga that Krishna has described in this chapter about Ashtanga Yoga, the yoga of eightfold mysticism. And we looked at some ways to overcome obstacles to controlling the mind, which is precisely what Arjuna feels he cannot possibly do, comparing controlling the mind to controlling the wind. And following up on this doubt, Arjuna asks, well, what if I give this a shot, but it doesn't work out? Then what happens at the end of this life? And we get some reassurance from Krishna about the destination of an unsuccessful yogi, someone who does not complete the path of yoga in a single lifetime, and the assurance of success if we simply persevere over multiple lifetimes. So Krishna lets us know that this is clearly a long-term project. Tonight, we are going to finish chapter 6, the Yoga of Eightfold Mysticism. We'll do a review of the chapter, and we will conclude with Krishna's opinion. One of the interesting things about the Bhagavad-gita is that Krishna, occupying the position of the Supreme Being, does not give commandments so much as he offers opinions and advice. And at the conclusion of this chapter, we will hear who, in Krishna's opinion, is actually in the position of the highest yogi, the most accomplished yogi. Okay. We will begin with takeaways. Our big takeaways from this chapter. The first is a definition of yoga. Yoga is action informed by transcendental knowledge that goes hand in hand with the renunciation of material desires and is performed exclusively for the sake of spiritual advancement. So this speaks to one of Arjuna's problems, his stumbling blocks in trying to understand the Bhagavad-gita, which is he's confused about whether Krishna is saying you should act or you should renounce action. And at this point, Krishna has succeeded in clarifying to Arjuna what he's driving at, which is that action that is exclusively directed towards spiritual attainment automatically includes renunciation of the pursuit of material desires. So there's no real conflict between acting and not acting. Renunciation here does not mean that you stop acting. However, there is a place for this inaction. In the beginning, action is the means, and then at a certain point, on the path of yoga that Krishna is describing here, one can walk away, renounce the world, and exclusively engage in the inward turn that is the latter steps in the process of yoga that Patanjali describes in his Yoga Sutras, the eight-limbed path, Ashtanga Yoga. So there is a legitimate form of yoga where action is in fact renounced in favor of an internal action. The last limbs of yoga beyond pratyahara, turning inward, are all internal processes, and Krishna describes them here. Where's my cursor? There it is. Okay. So, once again, yoga is action informed by transcendental knowledge that goes hand in hand with the renunciation of material desires and is performed exclusively for the sake of spiritual advancement. The next big takeaway, as we take another step into the chapter, is that the key to experiencing the supreme self within one's heart is to gain control over the mind. And Krishna spends a fair amount of time speaking about the importance of this, how the mind can be one's best friend or one's worst enemy. And the key to making the mind your friend is to gain control over it. Whereas if the mind has the upper hand, then the mind will take you where it wants to go, and it does not want to go to a state of self-realization. The mind has the responsibility to protect the false ego. Meditation is an assault on the false ego. Therefore, the mind, in its spontaneous response to meditation, is averse and prefers that we think about anything other than a transcendental object of meditation. The ultimate transcendental object of meditation is the Supreme Self within one's heart, the Paramatma. So, by concentrating on the Paramatma, one gains control over the mind, and having gained control over the mind, one experiences the Paramatma. So we go from theoretical knowledge, transcendental knowledge that directs our actions, and exercise control of the mind by meditating on the Supreme Person. And then that, in due course of time, becomes experiential knowledge. Control over the mind is gained, and the experience of the Supreme Person within one's heart and within the heart of all other beings is gained. The next of the big takeaways from this chapter is that there are two symptoms of spiritual progress. The first is we become indifferent to material wealth. In particular, we see pebbles, stones, or gold as being the same. So our equal vision is such that we don't place a great value on material wealth. We know that it's temporary. We know that it can be a big distraction. If karmically it comes of its own accord, that's great. We'll find a way to use it for our spiritual advancement. If by virtue of our karma it does not come, great. We will tolerate whatever inconvenience that an absence of wealth may bring. One way or another, it's not seen as particularly important. Just as in chapter 2, we hear that just as winter and summer seasons come and go, happiness and distress comes and goes, and we tolerate them both without being disturbed either way. So wealth happens, we tolerate it. And not so much wealth happens, we tolerate that. The same principle of equanimity is in play here. And then taking it a further step, the next symptom of even further advancement is equal vision toward all beings, seeing friends and enemies as being the same, which doesn't mean that we treat them the same. We don't respond to them in the same way. After all, Krishna is trying to convince Arjuna to engage in a fight to the death with his enemies, who happen to be family members. And yet, at the same time, Krishna is asking Arjuna to understand how every being is spiritually equal, which is not the same as the same. Certainly, in a material sense, no one is equal. Everyone is different. This is interesting to me from the standpoint of a little bit of American history. Not everyone who came to the North American continent from Europe bought into the idea of equality. In fact, the Confederacy, the people who spoke for the Confederacy at the time of the American Civil War, completely trashed Jefferson's idea that all men are created equal as expressed in America's Declaration of Independence. They were very much against this idea of equality. They liked the idea of liberty for those who were deserving of liberty by virtue of their station in society. People, human beings who were considered lesser, were not actually supposed to be given liberty, and they considered this a religious principle. Human beings don't evolve all that quickly. Oftentimes, people with a very progressive point of view will wonder aloud, how is it in the 21st century that anyone could still think like this? Well, we make rapid progress in the area of technology that makes it seem like things are evolving. And that technology allows people in cosmopolitan places to experience wide varieties of cultures, languages, ways of being in the world. And there are large parts of the world where people do not have that experience, that kind of cosmopolitan, international, global experience. And therefore, ideas about equality are not the same. So in many respects, from the standpoint of human nature, things are not quite as different in 2018 as they were in 1818 or even 1618. A lot of the same kind of thinking is there. And it is particularly interesting to me that this is a religious idea, that we are created unequal and that inherent material inequality is a reflection of our spiritual value. This is the sort of thing that I think is characterized in the Bhagavad-gita later as irreligion masquerading as religion, a symptom of this particular season of time called Kali Yuga that we are currently in. And the principle of religion that we find in the Bhagavad-gita is that all beings are in fact created equal. However, that equality is a spiritual equality. And we understand how all beings, not just human beings, but all beings are not created equal, but are inherently equal by virtue of their spiritual identity. And yet we act differently towards people according to time, place, and circumstance, and other beings according to time, place, and circumstance, because materially we are not equal. Our bodies and minds are different, and so we act with equanimity towards everyone, and yet we also act appropriately according to who it is we're dealing with and what the relationship is. And that's what Arjuna is being encouraged to do by Krishna, insofar as he is being asked to recognize the spiritual nature of everyone on the battlefield and yet not act all rainbows and unicorns with everyone, because all the soldiers, all the warriors on the other side, he has to do battle with. As always, if you have any questions or comments about anything that I am offering to you on this topic and all of our topics, please go ahead and pop a question or a comment into the Q&A box. I will be keeping my eye on that. In fact, when you see my eyes go like that, that's what I'm doing. The next big takeaway from this chapter is that success on the path of mystic yoga requires an extraordinary commitment to a very challenging process. So as we get in closer to the middle of the chapter, Krishna lays out the step-by-step process for executing Ashtanga yoga. You go to the forest, you lay out your kusha grass and your deerskin and your cloth, and you sit. And you control the life force with an extraordinary way, using the practices of pranayama that he described in an earlier chapter, such that you gain control over the life force and complete equanimity of mind, or stilling the fluctuations of the mind, as Patanjali puts it. And it takes quite a while and a lot of effort to make that happen. It's a mechanical process. And you have to be willing to commit to it. Steady practice over a long period of time. Again, the same idea that we find in the Yoga Sutras, that it don't come easy. You know, it don't come easy. Okay. However, success is assured for one who is willing to persevere across multiple lifetimes. The process of yoga is like opening up a bank account that you can put deposits into, but you never make withdrawals from. And it's more powerful than compound interest, because compound interest you lose at the end of your life, but what you gain from your yoga practice, you take with you into your next life, and you take a birth that is particularly conducive for your continuing along the path of yoga. So this should be a source of encouragement for us. And then we have a question. Can I explain indifference to material wealth versus artha? We are allowed to earn enough to eat and have a place to live and progress on the spiritual path. Yes. We are, in fact, allowed to earn enough to eat and have a place to live and still make progress on the spiritual path. In fact, in this particular season of time, Kali Yuga, we are encouraged to engage with the world, and that means we have to maintain ourselves. And that involves being able to buy groceries and pay the rent or the mortgage, as the case may be. You may even have to make a car payment so that you can go to your place of business to earn these things. If the entire enterprise is oriented towards spiritual progress, then the whole project becomes spiritualized. So, on the one hand, we understand that the amount of wealth we will accrue in this life is a function of karma. We can work very hard, still end up very poor. We can do nothing and still end up wealthy. If that's our karma, things aren't going to change that. However, we also have a responsibility to act. In other words, we have to do our part. So we engage in the kind of work that we have a natural aptitude for and attraction to. That allows us to be peaceful in our work. And if we don't have any particular attachment to the kind of work that we do, which is an even more advanced stage of karma yoga, then we simply work as we're obliged without attachment to the work itself, because our mind is not disturbed by having to do something that we really don't care about. All of the proceeds from what we earn go to maintain us so that we are comfortable. We don't go out of our way to live a lavish lifestyle. We don't take any wealth that we earn and go overboard with it. We live simply. And by living simply and not over-endeavoring for that which is difficult to attain, we create time and space for higher thinking, thinking about how we will make spiritual progress, how we can assist others in making spiritual progress, how everything that we do in our lives is oriented toward our spiritual upliftment and the upliftment of everyone in our lives. So when we do that, this is action informed by transcendental knowledge, where there's not a particular great attachment for material things other than what we need to be comfortable in our lives, for our minds to be peaceful, for our bodies to be healthy and secure. So that all of the additional energy that we have beyond earning a living that meets our needs can be directed towards our own spiritual advancement and our contribution to the spiritual lives of others. So please let me know if that satisfactorily answers your question. And if there are any follow-up questions, if you have a follow-up question or if anybody else has a follow-up question, please pop it into the Q&A box. While I wait for any further comments, the next big takeaway is that unity with the Supreme Person means seeing all beings with the same feelings of compassion with which the Supreme Person sees them. So this follows up on the point I was just making, that it's not just about our own spiritual advancement. One who works ceaselessly for the benefit of others was listed as one of the characteristics of someone making spiritual advancement. If we see everyone as a part of the Supreme Person, as within the Supreme Person, as resting on the Supreme Person, and we understand the feelings that the Supreme Person feels for all beings, then part of our union, part of our connection to that Supreme Person is that we develop the same feelings for everyone that the Supreme Person has. So this is just a natural evolution in our own spiritual development, and we develop an inclination to be of service to others when we can in their own spiritual lives. Hence, our mission is not just a solitary mission, or the project is not a project that happens in a vacuum. It's a social project. Which brings us to the last two verses of the 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. And we are going to chant both of those verses. Okay, good. I'm glad everyone's satisfied with the answer to my answer to the question. All right. So if you're new to the satsang, and I see that a few of you are, I'll just briefly explain the diacritical marks, the pronunciation cues that you will see in addition to the Roman letters of this transliterated Sanskrit. The apostrophe before the first letter of a word indicates that a vowel has been dropped in order to make the line fit in the right number of syllables for the cadence of the verse. So in the first line, you'll see there's an apostrophe before diko. And in ensuing lines, you will see the same thing. So those are dropped A's that allow the O in the word before it to smoothly merge right into that next word. The dot under an H at the end of a word at the end of a line, as in dika, in the second line, indicates that the vowel before the H will be echoed back. That rule only applies when the dot is under an H at the end of a word at the end of a line. An accent mark over an S indicates a low-pitched or pink noise SH sound, as opposed to a dot under an S, which is more of a high-pitched white noise sound, sh. The difference being you pronounce the apostrophe SH sound in the back of your mouth as opposed to the front of your mouth. A bar over a vowel indicates a long open version of that vowel. So with an A, that would be an ah as opposed to an uh. With an I, it would be an E instead of a it. And that covers, oh, and one more thing. The tilde over the N in the first word of the second line is a nya sound, like the Three Stooges, nya, nya, nya. And the J in front of it is pronounced more like a G than a J in this instance. Now, sometimes you will hear people say jnana with the word jnana, but most of the time you'll hear it pronounced as a G sound. So here we go. I will chant one line at a time, and then you chant each line back. Tapasvibhyo diko yogi Jnanibhyo pimato dhikaha Karmibhyascha diko yogi Tasmad yogi bhavarjuna. Our translation: a yogi is superior to the ascetic, superior to the empiricist, and superior to the ritualistic worker. Therefore, Arjuna, become a yogi. One of the ways I like to delve deeper into the meaning of a verse is by looking at each word in the verse. So we're going to do a little dissection of this verse first. So tapasvi means one who practices tapasya, or austerities, an ascetic, someone who renounces the world, so to speak, and purposely lives a very austere life. A jnani is, jnana means knowledge, so a jnani is one who pursues knowledge. In this case, one who is interested in empirical knowledge, that which is ascertained by observation. One of the three ways to know a thing is by direct perception. A jnani is also someone who engages in study of the Vedas, who tries to understand the absolute truth by means of an intellectual breakthrough or an intellectual insight. And then a karmi is someone who engages in action, as in karma. And in particular, Krishna refers to those who are engaged both in action and ritualistic action. That is, those who perform, make ritualistic performances or ritualistic sacrifices in order to achieve a material benediction. So this is both somebody who works for a material attainment or one who engages in religiosity with the expectation of a material reward. So a material conception of religion is what we're talking about here. So bhyo indicates then. So tapasvi bhyo, then the tapasvi, jnani bhyo, then the jnani, karmi bhyash, then the karmi. Diko or adika is the actual word. Remember the apostrophe, drop that A. So adiko, adika at the end of the second line. Chadiko, cha means also. So this means qualification. And in the context of the verse means a higher qualification, more qualified. The yogi is more qualified than someone who merely engages in tapasya, more qualified than someone who pursues knowledge, more qualified than someone who engages in fruitive work, work that is intended to generate a fruit to be enjoyed by the person who is doing the work, who is performing the action. Yogi actually subsumes all of these because, as we reviewed in our highlights, our highlight reel for this chapter, renunciation, tapasya, is appropriate renunciation. That is, each yogi engages in a level of renunciation that is appropriate for their action, for the kind of action they're going to perform without attachment. And jnana, the action is performed, informed by transcendental knowledge. So here we have action informed by transcendental knowledge that includes renunciation of material desires, is our definition of yoga. And a yogi actually includes all three of these, whereas someone who is performing just one of these three actions is at a lower stage of spiritual advancement. Tasmad yogi bhavarjuna, therefore, in all circumstances, be a yogi. So irrespective of what you do, you can combine all of these three things, and as in the question that we addressed earlier, integrate an element of renunciation, an element of knowledge, and an element of action into your yoga, and thus become a yogi in all circumstances. So, there was something missing. The question now arises, who is a mystic yogi not greater than? We got three categories: karma, someone performing karma, or karma, even karma yoga by itself; jnana yoga, someone who is engaged in the pursuit of transcendental knowledge through intellectual insight; a tapasvi, a renunciate, an ascetic, one who goes off to the forest to perform Ashtanga yoga, the eightfold process of mystic yoga. So, who is the greatest yogi then? Is answered in the next verse. So once again, we will chant the verse together. I will chant, you chant back, and I believe we covered all of our bases as far as the diacritical marks, the pronunciation cues go. So here we go, one line at a time. Yoginam api sarvesham madgatenan paratmana shraddhavan bhajate yomam same yukta tamo mataha. I did miss one diacritical mark. The M, at the dot over the M at the end of the third line indicates that you close your lips in front, but also the back of your tongue to the roof of your mouth and back at the same time, making a sound, a little bit of a nasal M as opposed to just Okay. Here is our translation. And of all types of yogis, those who always abide in me, think of me within themselves, and with complete faith, engage in devotional service to me, are most intimately united with me, and in my opinion, are the greatest of all. So let's break this verse down. So, yoginam api sarvesham simply means of all types of yogis. Api, and, or also, sarvesham, of all types, yoginam, of yogis. So, of all varieties of yogis. The next line is the one we'll really take a close look at. Mat gatena, so abiding in me. And always thinking of me. So how, you may wonder, can a phrase have two different definitions, always thinking of me and abiding in me? And the abiding in me part, always thinking of me part, runs directly into the next phrase, anta atmana, within himself or within oneself. So, Sanskrit is a very versatile and contextual language. And when we look up different words in a Sanskrit to English dictionary, we may find a wide variety of definitions, and particularly when we look at its usage and translation in yoga wisdom texts, then we find that based on the context of the usage of the word, that it will take on different meanings. Sometimes they will mean exactly the opposite, because you can take things two ways. For example, there's a story in a book called the Srimad Bhagavatam, or the Bhagavad Purana, where the demigod Daksha attempts to place a curse on Lord Shiva because Lord Shiva didn't stand up when he walked in the room. So he felt dissed by Lord Shiva and got so angered by it that he cursed Shiva. And in the process of his curses, he actually, if you were to take the words another way, was praising Lord Shiva. So the curse was at the same time a benediction. So similarly, Here we have two meanings of one phrase, and it's significant in a way that I will show you in just a moment. But first, all right, I love Brooklyn too. Please clarify which query you are addressing in the second part. Could it mean oneness, all of us? So Tess, if you'd be kind enough to elaborate on that a little bit so I can go deeper with you on that. While I'm waiting, we'll move on to this next line. Shraddhavan bhajate yomam. So Shraddha means faith. Van, in full faith. So extension or an expansion of faith. Not just faith, not just garden variety faith, but full faith, complete faith. And bhajate renders devotional service. So bhaja, very similar to the word bhakti, coming from the same place, is a really interesting word because it is sometimes taken to mean worship. But bhaja means more than that. You can worship many things or many people. They don't all have to be the supreme person. And worship indicates distance and can also indicate a formality, a ritual. Bhajate or bhaja, offering services, is a little bit different. It's active service that is specific to the Supreme Person. Hold on for just a second. All right, my Q&A window is not behaving the way I normally expect it to. So, bhajate, offering service to, is more of an active engagement in a relationship as opposed to the distance that's inherent in worship. So it's more of a direct engagement. And mom, to me. So once again, Krishna is being very specific here. And Tess, I got your question. I'll get to it in just a second. You remember earlier, Krishna was speaking about the Param Atma, the Supreme Person, the Supreme Lord within the heart, in a third person, as if this Supreme Person was someone else. But then he reveals that actually I am that Supreme Person within the heart. So here he's being very specific that I am the person that we're talking about here as the Supreme Being. And then the last line, Same yukta tamo mataha. So sa, he or one, that person, may, by me, yukta tamaha. So yukta means intimate, so yukta tamaha means intimately linked, or the greatest yogi, the one who is connected. Yukta is a word that means to connect, from the same root as yoga. So the one who is most intimately connected to me is the one who is engaged not in worship, but in service, who is directly engaged with me in this way. So now we get to the comment, because I asked a somewhat rhetorical question, abiding in me, always thinking of me, brings to mind oneness. The idea that we're all one with the Supreme Being. So here Krishna is making, bringing some clarity to the idea of how we are one with the Supreme Being. In what way are we one? Because that's the question that one might ask. So, one who always abides in me. This is a reference to Brahman. That is to say, the undifferentiated oneness of being. Everything is made of spiritual energy. And that spiritual energy, as we will hear later, is an emanation of the Supreme Person. So our oneness is in, first of all, our shared spiritual nature, which is also the nature of the Supreme Person. That is to say, we're all made of the same stuff, the same spiritual stuff, and we are all part of that one infinite Supreme Being. So therefore, we have a shared sense of spiritual identity. There is also the fact that we are all residing within the spiritual energy. Our bodies are made of a transformation of spiritual energy. The whole world, the whole material world is a transformation of spiritual energy. Everything is ultimately, in its true and original form, spiritual. So we are moving through the spiritual energy of the Supreme Person. We all have that in common. Thinking of me within oneself means that we are aware of the Paramatma, the localized aspect of the Supreme Person residing within the heart of every being. So in this sense, we are also one insofar as we all have the same Supreme Being residing within each of our hearts. It doesn't mean that we're the Supreme Being or that I'm you and you are me. What it does mean is that the same Supreme Person that's in my heart is also within your heart and has the same kind of feelings for you as for me. So this is another kind of oneness. Then how is spiritual feeling expressed? It's expressed through service. This is another way in which we have a kind of oneness. Our constitutional nature, our eternal characteristic, is that we seek to experience love and we act on that desire by offering service. And it is through service to our beloved that we experience the greatest happiness. So this is something that we all have in common. The idea that we are all pleasure-seeking, we all want to be happy. The ultimate happiness is the experience of a relationship of love, and the means by which love is exchanged is through service, the offering of service. So, let's take a look once again. This is a last look at our yoga ladder. Last week, when we talked about this, when Krishna, we talked about it in terms of Krishna reveals that he's the Paramatma, that the Supreme Lord within the heart of which he speaks is actually him, Krishna. But Krishna is Bhagavan. Every time Krishna speaks in the Bhagavad-gita, his speech is preceded by Shri Bhagavan Uvacha. Therefore, we have these three aspects of the absolute truth, two of which are in play prior to this last verse. Paramatma realization and the realization that Krishna is Paramatma. Therefore, Bhagavan realization is also accessible through this process of Ashtanga Yoga, from Paramatma realization to Bhagavan realization. But watch what happens in this last verse. Krishna puts all three of them together. Those who always abide in me, that's Brahman realization. That's realizing that we are within the Supreme Person. And that the energies of the Supreme Person are all around us, and there's no difference between the source of the energy and the energy itself. Just as there's no difference between the sun and the sunshine. You can't have one without the other. The sun without shine is not the sun, and shining can't happen unless there's a sun to emanate the shine. So abiding in me means realizing that we are situated in Brahman. Then thinking of me within themselves as Paramatma, and with great faith, engaging in service. So this is actually how Bhakti Yoga becomes the last ingredient in the process of Ashtanga Yoga that spiritualizes the whole thing. Action, knowledge, renunciation, and service all come together under the umbrella of Bhakti Yoga, which then opens up the possibility for realization of all three aspects of the absolute truth: Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. Okay. And that is going to be a segue into the next section of the Bhagavad-gita, where we transition to the 7th chapter, and that begins our section on Bhakti Yoga. So the Bhagavad-gita, from a structural standpoint, is divided into 3 sections. The first being Karma Yoga leading into Ashtanga Yoga. The second, Ashtanga Yoga transitioning into Bhakti Yoga. And then Bhakti Yoga transitioning into Jnana Yoga, the yoga of knowledge. Think of the Bhagavad-gita like a mountain. The peak is in the middle. So this section that we're entering into is actually heading up into the peak of the Bhagavad-gita, which is why Bhakti is on the top of the yoga ladder, as opposed to Jnana. So it's not just a linear progression, but rather there's an arc. And then there'll be a peak at the end. You could actually design the sequence of a yoga class around the elliptical pattern of the Bhagavad-gita. But that's a different workshop. Right now, what I want to know is, do you have any further questions about what we have spoken about this evening? I have a question about how to get my Q&A box to behave the way it used to, but that's a question for Zoom, not for you. All right, tell me what you got. Tell me what you got. Anything that we have in the way of questions and comments about what we've covered in this evening's episode, while I anxiously await your questions and comments. I will proceed to tell you that we have concluded the chapter of on meditation, Eightfold Mysticism. And if you have any questions after the fact, or if you were watching or listening to this after the fact, my email address is hari@hari-kirtana.com. Please send me your questions and comments. You can also look at our Facebook group, our Bhagavad-gita Satsang Facebook group, and post questions, comments, and other stuff there. If you have not already done so, and you have been kind enough to purchase a copy of my book, In Search of the Highest Truth, Adventures in Yoga Philosophy, I would appreciate it so much if you would visit Goodreads and Amazon and write a review. It really, really helps when more reviews are there. There are more reviews than the 21 listed here. And someone recently, who may be a member of this audience, whose identity I was not able to ascertain, was kind enough to write a review recently. So thank you very much. Next week, we begin chapter 7, the Yoga of Knowledge and Realization, Jnana and Vijnana. We'll look at the odds of achieving perfection. What do you think your odds are? We'll see how Krishna's calculating the odds of our success. We will also get, check this out, this is really awesome. We're going to get a complete description of reality. It's free. You're not even going to have to pay to find out what reality is and get a complete description of it. Awesome, huh? Talk about bang for your buck. And we will also discuss creation, maintenance, and destruction. Dum, dum, dum. We will cover verses 1 through 7 of the 7th chapter of the Bhagavad-gita. And that's all, folks. Thank you very much for spending this part of your evening with me. I'm very, very happy to see you all, and very happy to know you're out there, even if you're not here right now. Although, if you're listening to me right now, then you are here right now, and there's just no getting around it. Jess, you're very welcome. My pleasure. All right, I'm signing off. Thank you again. Have a wonderful rest of your evening, and I look forward to seeing you all next Thursday, or Shamala, in your case, tomorrow night. All right. Oops. And there it is. My button is hiding. All right. See you next time.